What's up, guys? My name is John Evans, and I'm going to tell you why Isaiah Rivera is one of the freakiest athletes I have ever seen in my entire life. So what we'll do, we'll break down each of the different categories. We're going to go Olympic lifting with the power clean, and we're going to compare it to some of the best Olympic lifters ever. Then we're going to look at his barbell back squat, and we're also going to compare it to people that are relatively his height, where their relative strength is, and where he sits compared to them. We're also going to look at standing vertical jump relative to NFL players because there is a massive data set there, and we can get a pretty good idea of how he compares to some of the most explosive athletes on the planet. We're also going to compare his RSI to some of the most explosive high jumpers in the history of the world. This includes Mutant, Fabian, Yannick Claassen, some of my favorite athletes to watch. And lastly, we're going to look at his sprinting and how it compares to the fastest people in the world. So you might not know this, but Isaiah is obviously a freak of nature. Now, if it's not so obvious, I'm going to tell you why you should start to view him in a different light. Now, at 183 pounds, Isaiah power cleans 150 kilos, which is 330 pounds. Simply put, he is just shy of 2 times body weight in a power clean at 6'2". If you were to look at all of the best weightlifters, most of them are going to fall in that 5'8" to 5'11" range. And if you go up to those heavier weight classes, you're going to see guys getting to that 6 foot to 6'3" range. But again, they are massive humans. So there aren't too many comparable athletes in the sport of weightlifting who are 6'2", 183 pounds. Most of these guys are going to be relatively shorter and a lot more dense for their height. They're also going to have really short tibias, really short femurs, and long torsos. That said, Liu Xiaojun, one of the best weightlifters ever, again, has very short tibias, very short femurs, regularly power cleans about 170 kilos at roughly 80 kilograms. So he has a similar weight to Isaiah, but he is 5'8". Isaiah is 6'2", and Isaiah is 20 kilos off of his regularly posted training PRs in the power clean. Now, he's probably done a little bit better, but we know he is one of the most powerful weightlifters ever. So at 170 kilos relative to his body weight, we know that he has one of the best power clean to body weight ratios ever. Now, I'm sure there are some examples out there, and you guys feel free to comment that in the comment section below of who those athletes are, how tall they were, and what their relative power clean was. But Isaiah is far and above an outlier in this regard. At 6'2", power cleaning 150 kilos, 330 pounds, only weighing 183. He is an absolute unit when it comes to low-end torque. He is like an electric car or a Hellcat Durango off the line, generates a ton of force in that second pull, and is incredibly powerful as a result, which you obviously can tell when you watch him jump 50.5 inches. Again, he is doing this as a training lift. He is not a weightlifter, and the fact he even is remotely close is wildly impressive. He shouldn't even be in the same ballpark as these guys, and I'm sure some weightlifters out there will say, well, 20 kilos is really not, but I would argue that he is way and above better than almost any power athlete who isn't doing the lifts as their main sport. All right, next we're going to look at his deep barbell back squat, and for those that don't know, at 6'2", all the way down, ass to grass, Isaiah has back squatted 440 pounds, which is 200 kilos. This puts his relative strength at about 2.4 times body weight, which is absolutely ridiculous. The standard used to be 2 times body weight. Isaiah has completely blown that out of the water. Keep in mind, that was with a half squat. With a deep squat, we want to see about 1.6 to 1.8 times body weight. Isaiah has absolutely trounced this at 2.4 times body weight. Now let's compare this to some of the best weightlifters ever. And I'm not talking power lifters, I'm talking ass to grass athletes who squat in a high bar Olympic style back squat. Mind you, some of these guys are probably on gear, but we're going to look at them anyways. So first, let's look at some athletes who are relatively his height and their weight. So the 2 athletes that I found are Clarence Kennedy and Wes Kitts. We know definitively that Clarence Kennedy was on, and as a result, he is insanely strong. His training was pretty robust, and I have seen him squat 300 kilos at 6 foot and about 90 to 95 kilos. This means he's pushing about 3 to 3.5 times body weight in a deep barbell back squat, which is absolutely insane and trounces Isaiah. But let's look at someone like Wes Kitts, who is 6'2", about the same height as Isaiah, who has relatively longer limbs. Remember, when you have longer limbs, it is going to be harder to stand up at the bottom because the external torque is rising at a massive rate, and for every inch that your knee or hip moves away from the line of action, it is going to get really hard to stand up that weight. So at 6'2", Wes Kitts weighed around 103 kilograms, and the best squat that I could find was about 260 kilograms. Now we know that as you get bigger, it is harder to keep your relative strength up, but this is the best that I could do, and this is about 2.7 to 2.9 times body weight for Wes Kitts. Again, this is someone who has relatively shorter femurs and shorter tibias. It is still a crazy metric, don't get me wrong, but the fact that Isaiah is even in the ballpark with athletes where their entire sport is lifting massive weights is crazy. Remember, we're doing this lift as a training stimulus to jump higher, and Isaiah has hit 200 kilograms in a deep barbell back squat. That is absolutely insane. If you were to look at some of the shorter athletes at his body weight, they're going to definitely eclipse that 3 to 3.5 times body weight. For example, Liu Xiaojun, I think, has squatted almost 300 kilos, which is insane. It's one of the best relative body weight deep barbell back squats we we've ever seen on the entire planet in the history of the world. Again, maybe he was on gear, maybe he wasn't. That does change a little bit of that result. But nonetheless, the fact that Isaiah is even in the same ballpark as someone like Wes Kitts, an Olympic weightlifter for the US who was absolutely dominant in our sport, in our country, is very, very, very impressive. And it is a testament to how strong Isaiah really is. The next one we're going to look at is a vertical jump. Now, the greatest data set that we can use is the NFL Combine. These guys are regularly testing their standing verticals. However, we have a big problem with this, and that is that most of these guys are going to fudge their reach. Now, you may not realize this, but at 6'3", Chris Connolly tested a 45-inch vertical. It's one of the highest tested vertical jumps in the history of the NFL Combine, and he only touched 11.7.5. Now, this might not strike you as a little bit problematic, but at 6'3", he is an inch taller than Isaiah and testing 5 inches higher than Isaiah's best standing vertical measured ever. This means that he would have to touch roughly 12 feet with about an 8'3" reach. If you watch the video, it is very clear that he is missing 4 of those blue tabs when they show the angle from the top, which demonstrates that he touched about 11.7.5 and his reach is relatively high. For him to hit a 45-inch vertical, he would have had to have about a 7'11" reach at 6'3". Now, 5'11.5" with relatively longer arms, my reach standing is 7'11". This means he had the same standing reach as me when he is in the 92nd percentile for arm length, and his wingspan is roughly 7'1 to 7'3 based on his shoulder width as an NFL wide receiver and his arm length. Now, this is a massive discrepancy, but I don't really blame them. The NFL players are trying to absolutely get the most inflated number so they can increase their draft pick, make them look really, really good for prospective teams, and make a lot of money. We're going to remove that lens, and we're going to look at what his actual reach was, which is probably around 8'3", and with an 11.7.5 touch, he comes in at about a 40-inch vertical jump. So Isaiah, someone that does train vertical leap in an approach but doesn't do standing vertical jumps, tested relatively close to one of the best ever to do it in the NFL Combine, if we're assuming that all of these guys are cheating their reach. We can further validate this by just looking at what they each touched. If Chris Conley touched 11.7.5 and Isaiah touched 11.6, and he's about an inch taller than Isaiah is in shoes, and his arms are even longer than Isaiah's are, it makes sense that both of them tested about a 40-inch vertical. He only tested an inch and a half higher, and again, he's taller and has probably a longer wingspan. This would put Isaiah in basically the 99th or 100th percentile in standing vertical leap amongst some of the most explosive athletes on the entire planet. NFL football players' success in their sport, especially at the wide receiver and DB position, is predicated on their ability to change direction, accelerate incredibly fast, and be wildly explosive athletes. Now, Isaiah does do very, very similar training for the same goals, so it makes sense that his standing vertical is very good, and he is a jumping athlete. So we know that he's incredible at the power clean. He is very, very strong relative to his body weight and height and build, and his standing vertical leap is absolutely insane compared to some of the highest standing verticals ever measured. But let's look at his RSI, or Reactive Strength Index. This is a metric I like to use a lot of the time. It's a good measure for the stiffness of your tendons, and it makes sense that Isaiah would be very, very good at this specific test. The highest numbers that I've seen is Yannick Clausen. I believe he tested about a 5.3 or 5.5 in a multiple repeat hop stiffness jump. There isn't a lot of data out there, but I do know that my athlete Fabian has tested about a 3.6 to 3.8 RSI. He might have even broken to the 4s at one point, but he's 6'9" and weighs about 95 kilograms. His body fat percentage is relatively the same as Isaiah's, and I'll get to that in a little bit. But Isaiah's best RSI test is 3.84, and he does not perform this exercise regularly. This means that he is testing an RSI that is comparable to some of the best high jumpers out there. I was able to find some data that indicated that Mutaz was about 4.1 to 4.5, and he is one of the most elastic athletes I've ever seen in vertical jump. So while he does fall short in this metric compared to the absolute best, if you were to look at skill positions in the NFL or skill positions in the NBA, you're going to see things anywhere from about 3.8 to 3.5. In the skill positions in the NBA, you're probably going to see about 3.2 to 3.5. And this is private data. It's not released, but there is a little bit of information out there from lectures and some different papers that indicate that is roughly where these guys are going to fall in those metrics. Now, again, it was hard to find this data, so if you have data, go ahead, post it below. I would like to see how Isaiah compares to these absolute freaks in the NFL and NBA. Another thing to remember is that Isaiah is a 2-foot jumper. He's not a 1-foot jumper like these high jumpers, and they are going to excel in RSI testing. For perspective, my best RSI is in the 4s, and as a 1-foot jumper, that does make a lot of sense compared to his 2-foot jumping. Isaiah is going to preferentially shoot for height over very short ground contact times, which means that if you pick a strategy where you pick a really short ground contact time and you're still jumping really high, you're going to be able to inflate that RSI number. If he picks a different strategy, who knows how high he could get. And also, I've seen a testing familiarity bias where if you're really, really familiar with doing repeat hops, you're going to test considerably better than guys that don't. Isaiah's only done it about 3 times over the entirety of us working together, and that's because I don't like to piss off his Achilles, but nonetheless, he is still incredibly impressive when it comes to Reactive Strength Index. So now that we know that he's incredibly strong, he's incredibly powerful, and he is incredibly elastic, let's go ahead ahead and look at his percent body fat. World-class sprinters fall around 7% body fat, and this comes from Ralph Mann's work, and it makes sense because you have to overcome the acceleration due to gravity on your body each foot contact. This means that when you're accelerating or when you're upright, you have to overcome that vertical force first before you really start to get net forces pushing you down the track and accelerating you. Why this is relevant is that fat is the enemy when it comes to elite performances in quantitatively assessed metrics. So if you're a sprinter, you're a jumper, that extra fat mass is going to deter from your ability to move across the track or vertically by a massive amount. Every pound of fat that you shed is less force that you're gonna have to generate into the ground fighting you to get the same outcome, meaning a 12 meter per second sprint at top speed or a 4.8 meter per second vertically jumping. That said, we've tested Isaiah on a DEXA and he came in at about 8.8% body fat. This is not when he was in his absolute best shape. I'm thinking he probably could have gotten around the low 8s when he's sprinting a lot. For example, right now he is absolutely diced far more than he was when he did his DEXA scan. He's also lighter. So if we know that elite world-class sprinters, the most explosive, powerful athletes in the world with the best relative power compared to their body weight in an elastic activity fall at around 7%, and Isaiah's at about 8.3, we know that he is an absolute outlier in that regard. He's gonna fall in that high 90th percentile for anyone on the planet, but definitely when it comes to world-class athletes, he is getting close to that 7% body fat that world-class sprinters have, which is very, very impressive in addition to all the other metrics that we've looked at. So the last area that we're gonna look at is his sprint times. Now, I will be honest here and transparent. Isaiah is not an outlier when it comes to sprint speed. This is probably the area that he is the worst at, and it makes sense when you look at how he jumps and his other metrics. Isaiah is a 2-foot jumper and has roughly 240 milliseconds to generate force on the ground in a jump. Elite sprinting is largely predicated by your ability to generate force around 100 milliseconds. This means that Isaiah has 2.5 times more time on the ground to generate force. Elite sprinters are really only hitting that ground contact time in the block clearance, where they're pushing out of the blocks in that initial start phase. They're getting about 260 milliseconds on that initial push. So while Isaiah might be really, really great out of the blocks, he is lacking in the ability to reposition his limbs and generate force over shorter intervals. Elite sprinters are on the ground for 80 milliseconds during upright sprinting. This means that they have way less time to generate force and run really, really fast, and this is where Isaiah falls short. He's not able to get the same stiffness and reposition his limbs fast enough to equate to what these elite sprinters are doing. We are working on this all the time, but nonetheless, Isaiah has still run about a 4.7 in the 40-yard dash. Now, while this isn't world-class speed, it is relatively good. However, compared to his back squat, his power clean, his RSI, and his body fat percentage, it is definitely lacking, and this is an area that we're definitely gonna be working on in the coming months. So if you guys didn't understand how much of a freak athlete Isaiah is, I hope you do now. We've developed him all the way from a 43-inch vertical to 50.5. His power clean has gone from 220 to 330. His back squat has gone from 315 to 440. His body fat percentage was probably around 10, and now it's in the low 8s. And his sprint times have gone from about a 5.1 to a 4.7. So he has improved immensely. And I want you guys to take notes because I want you to pay attention to how long it took. This didn't happen overnight, but Isaiah is a testament to what consistency and hard work can do if you stay with the process. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.